Across fiction, there's always been something that's bothered me. Villains are supposed to be evil, maniacal, and completely opposed to the hero's ideals. But what happens when the villain isn't evil? When they share the same goals as the hero, but see a harsher truth? These kinds of villains offer something rare. A mirror held up to the world to show what it really is. Where the hero dreams of what could be, the villain sees reality for what it is. A broken world, a system that failed, and the hard truth is that someone has to fix it, even if the methods are unthinkable. The villain believes that they alone have the responsibility to fix the world in their image. And from a certain perspective, they're right. I'm Cheshire, and today, we're talking about when the villain is right. Part 1. Nature versus nurture. Villains are often the byproduct of their environment. Growing up in poverty, war, oppression, and experiencing the countless atrocities of humanity in the process. They see the absolute worst of the world and make it their mission to change it. Sounds noble, right? It is, but the way in which they achieve their goals does matter. The ends justify the means, so they say. Depending on the story, villain, and context, that can be the case. However, the norm tends to argue otherwise. Villains may be right in their goals and ideals, but the world, society, and hero reject their methods. Let me ask you, what would you do if you held the one solution to fix hunger, disease, or war forever? The only catch? Everyone would hate you for it. Would you do it? Now compare the villain's upbringing against the hero's. One grows up from a place of privilege, peace, and friendship. The villain, by contrast, is forged in fire, abandoned, overlooked, or abused. The best villain is one that the audience can understand, albeit root against. However, a fine line exists between creating a well-written villain that serves to antagonize the protagonist, and one that is far more interesting than the hero themselves. When in doubt, it's always better to have a more compelling villain than a boring one. And the most compelling villains are a reflection of the hero, aka foils. A mustache-twirling villain is fine and dandy, but when the villain represents the antithesis of the hero and makes a good point, all the better. They could have been heroes had life gone a bit differently, and that makes them dangerous and tragically human. Such villains offer a unique perspective for writers to explore not only the nuance of the overall conflict, but directly appeal to the audience pathos in the form of a character mirror against the protagonist. They offer a glimpse into what could have happened to the hero if circumstances were only slightly different. Bonus points if they share the hero's burden of trying to carry the world on their shoulders. It's no accident that so many stories create character foils for the hero. The hero and villain aren't just opposites, they're reflections of each other. One represents hope, the other despair, but they share the same weight, the burden of fixing a broken world. The only real difference between the hero and villain in these cases is their upbringing. Beyond that, in another life, the hero and villain could have been friends. But alas, circumstances, fate, and the chaotic nature of the world made them this way. These types of villains aren't inherently evil in the mustache-twirling way. They're far more nuanced than that. They ask fundamental questions about existence and are often rejected by society for daring to change the world alone. It isn't the villain's ideals that are questioned, but their actions. In other words, if you do evil for the sake of good, are you and your actions bad? From the villain's perspective, they're right, and the hero's getting in their way and spouting some nonsense about the power of friendship. But from the hero and world's perspective, this genocidal maniac is talking about world peace while pointing a bazooka at you. Part 2. The ends justify the means. Is it right to commit evil for the sake of good? The villain would argue yes. They have the power, the means, and the opportunity to shape the world in their image after all, and the only thing stopping them is a group of friends with unbreakable plot armor on their side. It's boring if the villain wants to take over the world for the sake of it. Instead, when the villain has an overarching goal that requires world domination, their evil crusade comes across as a bit more nuanced at the very least. A prime example of this is Madara Uchiha from Naruto. After growing up in an age of constant war between squabbling clans, against his better judgment, Madara chose to join hands with his friend and rival, Hashirama Senju, to establish the first shinobi village. But war and bloodshed didn't end. It only grew more complex and violent. From Madara's perspective, only he had the will and strength to rid the world of strife. But to do so, he'd have to make untold sacrifices in the name of peace. Manipulation, murder, and betrayal. All to save humanity from itself by trapping everyone in a world of dreams. Extreme? Absolutely. Technically the end of free will, but hey, peace in our time, right? While he may have had a point, in realizing there was a problem, his solution to said problem was villainous. What about a more tame and righteous example? Amon from The Legend of Korra is perhaps the series' greatest villain. His existence answers a fundamental problem with the world of the Avatar: The Last Airbender. In a world full of magical wizards with control over the elements, where does that leave the common folk? Those who are just everyday normal people. For much of the series, we follow the adventures of benders. But if one class of people has literal power over the other, oppression and inequality are bound to pop up. Cue the Equalists, an extreme radical movement that sought to create an equal and just society by removing Bender's ability to bend the elements. Amon and his followers used hit-and-run tactics, terrorism, and any methods available to shake Republic City to its core. Extreme, yes, but Amon was technically right that the foundations of society allowed Benders to dominate non-Benders. And in the context of villainous plans, it's not exactly exciting to watch a non-violent movement protest. Amon sought equality through violence and intimidation, and historically, when oppression and subservience are the only alternatives, revolution becomes inevitable. In a world where magical elites control society, the powerless have few options. Amon just chose the fastest route: violence. Madara fought to end strife and conflict, while Amon rallied the masses against Bender oppression. But what about when society itself is corrupt and unjust? Stain from My Hero Academia is about as evil as one gets, being a mass serial killer and all. But his message rang true about the hypocrisy of hero society. He wasn't right because he killed. He was right despite of it. Heroes didn't become heroes for the sake of protecting the weak or fighting injustice. No. In My Hero Academia, heroes are glorified celebrities who make their living fighting crime for the sake of riches and fame. They don't save people because they're good-hearted individuals. The incentives of wealth are too great for those with quirks compatible with hero society. And for those with quirks that weren't marketable or pleasant, they were exiled to the fringes of society with no alternatives but to become criminals in order to survive. While the ends didn't justify the means for Stain's message, he did fundamentally rock hero society to its core because he was right. Part 3. When heroism falters, villainy rises. Some of the best villains in fiction are multi-layered characters who were once genuinely good people, but circumstances, tragedy, and the world itself turned them into hollow individuals. Those who were once full of promise and hope for a better future became jaded and ragged from reality. In the end, hopeful dreamers become cynical monsters when reality lets them down. Such villains offer a unique perspective in how human perception is vast and nuanced. If there is a winner, there must also be a loser. Life is subjectively unfair, and through the lens of villainy, we the audience can at the very least understand or even pity those whose paths become treacherous and unforgiving. The best villains were once heroes who tried and failed to realize their hopes and dreams. They offer an inverse perspective for the hero as the character foil. But beyond the meta-storytelling answer, such villains are genuinely compelling as they come across as entirely human, despite their villainous tendencies. Because a hero is only as good as the villain standing in their way. But every so often, a villain appears that completely steals the show, either from their design, charisma, or righteous mission that only they have the courage and power to achieve, despite the numerous war crimes it will take to achieve their goal. These villains are more than just obstacles for the protagonist. They become the ideological spine of the entire story. Their philosophies linger long after the final battle. They force the audience to sit with uncomfortable questions. What would I do in their shoes? Is the hero actually fixing anything, or just preserving a broken system? These types of villains don't exist to be defeated. They exist to challenge, not just the hero's fists, but their beliefs. They introduce friction in the narrative that forces growth, whether it's the hero reevaluating their ideals, or the audience questioning their moral boundaries. And when written well, these villains often become the real protagonist of their own narrative. They're the character with the clearest goal, the boldest actions, and the willingness to carry the burden that others won't. The world may label them a villain, but deep down, we recognize something noble, or at the very least necessary, in their conviction. Because sometimes, it's not the hero who's fighting to change the world, it's the villain. And that's what makes them unforgettable. Not all villains are right, but sometimes the villain is the only one brave or broken enough to act. I'm Cheshire, and thanks for watching.